Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tony Mancini, and welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee. It's March the 6th at 1:30. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to start off, first of all, of course, acknowledging that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. Actually, the first time this committee has gotten together since the election, so it's fantastic. We have some new committee members around the table. I'd like to introduce the new committee members: Councillor Hartland, Councillor White, Councillor Day Gammon, Councillor Austin, which will come in here very rapidly, I'm sure, Councillor Steele. We're joined by other councillors that are interested in our topics today: Councillor Young, Councillor Morris, Councillor Gillis. And for all councillors that maybe are not on the committee, just to be clear, you're absolutely welcome, but you're also welcome to ask questions like you normally at any meeting. The only difference is that if there's a vote that you can't vote, but we welcome you to ask as many questions as you like within our rules. So welcome to everybody. Today's agenda, we've got some three very interesting topics. I think there's a lot of folks watching online today interested in these topics. We're going to talk about healthy lakes, the Halifax water fluoridation in our water, and the urban forest master management plan. So let's look at the approval of the minutes from the December 5th. So somebody was on the committee at that point in time, Councillor Day Gammon, seconded by well, nobody else is on the committee from last time, so Councillor White will do the minutes. Good, Councillor White. All those in favor? We now have official minutes. We now come to approval of the order of business, approval of additions and deletions. Madam. Very much. Do we have any additions or deletions?
No, Chair. No additions or deletions have been received by the clerk's office.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic. Anything from committee? Seeing nothing from the committee, if we could have someone move the order of business. Councillor Day Gammon, seconded by Councillor Hartling. All in favor? We now have an agenda. Thank you. Is there any business arising out of the minutes? Seeing none, we call for declaration of conflict of interests. Motions of reconsiderations, motions of rescissions, consideration of deferred business, and notice of table matters all fall into the non-category. And then we come to correspondence. Madam Clerk, are there any correspondence or petitions?
Yes, Chair. Correspondence was received for item 10.3.1 and 10.3.2, and that correspondence has been circulated to the committee members.
Thank you, Dorothy. Fantastic. From the committee members, any petitions? Seeing none. And now we're going to come to presentations, I believe. Yes. And the first presentation up is 10.3.1, 1,000 lakes. Let me make sure I have this all lined up. And I believe we have Seo Gadet. How are you, sir? Good to see you. Welcome to the Environment Committee. You are very familiar with this committee, I know.
I am.
So we have 10 minutes for your presentation, and Dorothy will let you know when there's 30 seconds left. She's going to share with you a reminder, this very high-tech reminder. Here it comes. Make sure you're paying attention for it. There it is. Look at that. High-tech reminder. And then when your time is up, we'll follow up on that high-tech reminder. You have a slide deck, I believe.
Do.
Joining you online, and she'll be available to answer questions when it comes time for questions. So as soon as you have your slide deck up, and we'll start the time.
Just a moment. Where is slideshow? There's slideshow. There it is. But it's not working. There?
Yep.
Okay.
Hit from begin.
All right. We're
good?
We're up and running. This is red, so Okay, there we go. Sorry about that, councillors. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Seo Godet, and I live in Dartmouth. Today I'm speaking on behalf of the Independent Science and Policy Freshwater Advisory Group called the Thousand Lakes. Dr. Campbell is joining by Zoom, and Dr. Willison is right there. So, Thousand Lakes was formed as an independent successor to the Regional Watersheds Advisory Board. Like that board, our members have considerable knowledge and experience in freshwater science and policy, as well as access to a large network of science and policy professionals in the private sector, academia, and government. Also like that board, we are all volunteering our time and expertise, but we're very different from the RWAB in two important ways. Namely, we aim to provide advice to decision makers at all levels of government, and we are fully independent. We accept no donations except of time and effort, and we receive no financial or any other support from anyone. This provides us the freedom to express our professional opinions on all matters concerning freshwater that we consider important from a public policy perspective. So our current membership consists of Dr. Linda Campbell. She's a professor of limnology at St. Mary's University who once served as the chair of the RWAB. Bob Rutherford, an aquatic habitat biologist who has been very involved in the rehabilitation of Oat Hill Lake and other community-based watershed and watercourse restoration projects throughout the province. Dr. Martin Willison is an ecologist who is very involved in lake issues in his community of Spryfield, and myself, an environmental economist and policy analyst formerly with Environment and Climate Change Canada. I and Dr. Willison were also former members of the RWAB. We'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate city staff and council for a lot of good work that's gone on in the past few years, specifically significantly improved policy analysis and development capacity, expanded testing programs that engage communities, which is very important. The first ever Lake Watchers report was published in 2024, and of course the launch of the Watersheds Framework. So the steering committees for the two pilot watersheds will soon begin their work. We're here today to share our perspectives on the problems facing the Dartmouth Lakes and to offer possible strategies and solutions. In the course of this presentation, I hope to convince you of 5 propositions. Number 1, our lakes are extremely valuable. Number 2, they're irreplaceable. Third, strong action is both necessary and justified. Fourth, we're out of time. Fifth, we need to change how we think about the problem. So, councillors, Dartmouth is the city of lakes. It's a point of enormous pride for us Dartmouthians. Our lakes provide numerous benefits to the community. And just like any other public asset, they need to be maintained and, if necessary, repaired to ensure that they continue to provide these services. The big difference is that natural assets are irreplaceable by their nature. We have no choice but to take care of them if we want them to continue to provide benefits to the community. Unfortunately, here in Nova Scotia, we have done exactly the opposite. Not only are there still no regulations requiring developers in Halifax Water to prevent untreated stormwater from entering the lakes, provincial policies actually encourage directing untreated stormwater to the nearest natural watercourse. As a result, all of the stormwater in the Dartmouth Lakes watershed is carried directly, untreated, into the lakes, carrying nutrients, salt, excrement, numerous other pollutants directly into the lakes. This, of course, is a recipe for disaster. That disaster has happened, and we see these things happening in our lakes. So, but more importantly, from a public policy perspective, we need to ask, what are the impacts, right? Here's a partial list, and we will be returning to it in a different context. I want to stress that, councillors, time is not on our side. The severity of impacts depends on the cumulative stock of pollutants in the lake. Internal nutrient cycling means that nutrient concentrations tend to increase year over year as plants and animals die and release their nutrients to the next generation of plants and animals that grow even larger, and so on, year after year. We've seen that process play out in Lake Banook. The weeds in Lake Banook are native. They are not invasive species. They were initially very small. Now they are out of control. You can see this for yourselves if you go paddling on Lake Bannock in August and look down into the water. It has become, as one kayaker put it, a weed garden. In the extreme, lakes can cross ecological tipping points where they become unusable. We don't know where these tipping points are or how close we may be to them. However, it would be foolish to think that our lakes are somehow immune to this phenomenon and that we can just keep on doing what we're doing. Climate change is accelerating, and this will make lakes more sensitive to certain problems. But this is not a reason to give up. To the contrary, it's a reason to have an even more intense focus on the root causes. So all of the impacts that we saw very briefly before can be translated into dollar terms using econometric techniques. I used to do this for a living. Let's look at just two of these. Skin irritation after swimming imposes pain and suffering on the individual. It results in costs to our medical system if they go to a doctor, and pharmaceutical costs if they need treatment. The loss in property values could be particularly large if an ecological tipping point is crossed and the lake becomes unusable for recreation. These are just two examples. The broader point is that all of these costs are real, they are measurable, they are significant, they are happening now, and they have been increasing over time. If nothing is done, they will continue to increase in the years to come. So, councillors, we need to break the cycle of nutrient accumulation. We know that the fundamental cause of the problems in the Dartmouth Lakes is a legacy stormwater system that carries pollutants into the lake. We also need to keep all of the other pollutants out of the lake, and the only way really to do that is to have engineering solutions. So the Watersheds Framework provides an ideal opportunity to tap freshwater science and engineering expertise in the broader community and beyond to suggest and debate solutions. The steering committee is empowered to commission studies, including engineering studies. We think they should do so. 1,000 Lakes is ready and willing to help to the extent that we can, including by reaching out to other specialists in our networks. Councillors, as always, there is a lot at stake when making decisions about how to spend precious taxpayer dollars. Certainly, we need to avoid cosmetic solutions that do little and cost a lot. We encourage the steering committee to keep the 3 E's of good policy development in mind as they're considering solutions. Policies should be effective. That means they solve the problem they're intended to solve. Efficient, they do so in a cost-effective way, and equitable. They do not impose undue costs or benefits on any individuals or groups. Councillors, we need to act quickly to avoid the worst outcomes. One thing that does not need to wait is an education campaign. We're stressing a frank education campaign, one that does not mince words about what happens to the stormwater falling on people's properties, what the consequences of that are, and what they can do about it. Now, the most common initial reaction to the suggestion of engineering solutions is that it will cost too much. Certainly true. But thinking only of the costs of action ignores the costs of inaction, which we have seen are real, are happening already, and will only increase. And although it will be expensive, there may be several ways to spread the pain. Of these, I want to point specifically to provincial participation, which to me seems, and to us, seems particularly justified given their very large historical role in creating the problem. And finally, councillors, I'd like to leave you with a question to contemplate. That is, how much more attractive a community would Dartmouth be if it could boast 2 clean and healthy, always open recreational lakes? How about rebranding Dartmouth the city of clean lakes and then working tirelessly to make that a reality? We want to suggest that could provide innumerable benefits to the community and be an additional draw for tourists and additional events, international events. So councillors, thank you again for listening. I and Dr. Campbell would be pleased to answer any questions you may have, and I'm sure Dr. Willison would be happy to step in at any time as well.
Mr. Cadet, thank you very much. You know where I'm responsible for in this community. So when you keep talking about how special Dartmouth is, I'm on board. So thank you for that. So do we have any questions from the committee or visiting councillors? Councillor White, so happy that you chimed in. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Theo. I just wanted a little more detail on the frank communications. What needs to be communicated to who, by whom?
So sure. So local residents. So there's an anecdote that is told by one of our scientists that in one of his community interactions, a woman was shocked to learn that the dog excrement she was putting down the storm sewer was going directly within a few feet to the lake that was right there. Mm-hmm. So she assumed that it would be treated, right? And that would be a fair assumption probably anywhere else in Canada, but not here. So the education campaign has to go to the surrounding communities, and it has to be very frank about, look, what happens on your property goes directly into the lake.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kathy Daigle-Gavin, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. I really enjoyed going through it last night, and then to hear you present it. That's always an interesting little dynamic, right? Because it's the extra little stuff they add in all the time that makes this come to life. So one of the things that I was looking for a little bit was just around our land use bylaws. So for example, and how development is contributing to the status of our lakes. So we have in District 14 and 17 the net zero phosphorus loading, so that any construction, right, you have to make sure that you mitigate the phosphorus loading in order to protect our lakes. So where do you think that fits? I know when we think about all of the lakes within HRM, we're the only district that has that in terms of our policies. So where do you think that fits in Clean Lakes?
I'll say only, I'm not intimately aware with the bylaws, but I'll say only that there are two sort of major causes of the pollution. One is during the construction phase, right? And that's large. And some of our scientists, the jury's out whether the initial construction phase is the huge loading that can never be overcome, or is it the constant inflow of pollutants year after year that accumulates in the lakes? And the answer is probably both. So we do need to be very careful about development and keeping those substances out. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have Carney Lake in my district, and in the process of trying to do something to help preserve Carney Lake and keep it fit for swimming and that sort of thing, I've run across various barriers and complications. And one of them is that we don't have very strong watershed protection legislation at the provincial level. So I'm wondering if you just comment a little bit on that and what would be needed that would help us at the municipal level from your point of view.
Certainly provincial regulations that would not permit untreated water to go into lakes. I mean, it's pretty basic, I'm sorry to say, but it's out of line. I did speak with one of my former colleagues at Environment and Climate Change Canada. It's out of line with the Council of Canadian Ministers of the Environment. It's just the worst practice in terms of good practices, bad practices. It's the worst practice you could imagine.
And why is it not addressed at the provincial level, do you think?
Lack of political will.
Okay. Has your organization asked for it, or have other?
We have not, but if there's a forum like this that you could suggest us to go and ask for it, we would be pleased to do that.
Okay. All right. Maybe HRM needs to put that forward as well.
My understanding was, I think, wasn't the mayor going to write to the premier at one point, Councillor Daigle? Yeah. And did that happen? I don't know. But there was.
Okay, my understanding is that without something stronger at the level of provincial legislation, it's challenging for HRM to take steps forward on, as you suggest that we need to do.
I totally agree.
Okay.
I could not agree more. Those regulations need to come from the province, and we need to demand them.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. You know, the previous mayor has written numerous letters to our friends down in the province. Some get responded to, many don't. And I think our new mayor is now following suit on the same. So that's an interesting topic to have. Next up is Councillor Cuddle. Sorry, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
That's one of the reasons for the awareness, right? We had a question before about the importance of awareness. Well, if residents suddenly know that this happened, perhaps it'd be easier to convince them that it shouldn't happen again.
Thank you
you so much.
Councillor Cuddle. Wouldn't mind starting Councillor Cuddle's time again, please? Go ahead, Councillor.
Oh, thank you there.
I always have Spryfield's back. You know that, right?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. You touched on many subjects that are near and dear to my heart around stormwater management, around the jurisdictional issues dealing with watershed management. One of the things that I was happy to see put in place by the municipality that you referenced was the watershed framework, and using 9 Mile River watershed in what's now District 13 and District 12, looking at how we can better manage that through land use policy, and in urban eutrophication. That was the terminology I was given through a mapping study that was done, where it's really about the cumulative effect of developments on an entire watershed system, and it even touches on federal jurisdiction as well, especially when it comes to things like lakes that have fish in them and other issues like that. So I over my 4 years on council, talking about protecting our water, our lakes, our rivers, our bogs, our wetlands. They're all interconnected and play a critical role, not just in protecting our water source, but also in managing our stormwater. That has been a topic of discussion here at council, but it really is needing that integration with the provincial, policy, as well, as Councillor Morse was alluding to there. So I would encourage efforts at the provincial level, even talking to local MLAs, talking to the Minister of Environment, and natural resources, because we have to work together. And I believe we did request that letter. I have a recollection. Whether it was sent or not, I can't confirm, but it's certainly something that I can look into to see if it was sent. But we need hopefully a role for your group,
Yes.
as well as raising that public awareness,
Yes.
and making it an issue at both the federal and provincial levels.
Yes, thank you. I'm hearing that message loud and clear. So yes, our next stop probably.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hartling.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time that you've taken, and thank you so much for coming here today, giving us more and better information. So thank you very much for that. As Councillor Cuddle mentioned, I am the councillor for District 13, and the 9 Mile watershed is in my district. Well, I have two questions, but I just thought that I would, mention who I am and why it's significant to me in terms of watershed management. So 9 Mile was selected specifically because it is rural, and the 9 Mile watershed actually empties into Shad Bay. So I'm wondering if you have any experience or thoughts or recommendations when it comes to watersheds that don't collect into lakes, but collect into other bodies of water, i.e. the ocean. And then my second question is, and this is around gaining awareness. You mentioned that, somebody might not know that, their day-to-day activities could be negatively affecting, bodies of water, whether it be lakes, rivers, however it might be negatively impacting the watershed. Could you, because you do have a platform today, is there anything that you would like the folks in HRM to know in terms of things that they can do today that will positively impact their lakes, streams, rivers, and watersheds? Thank you.
On the first question, whether water bodies drain into the ocean or drain into lakes, they're equally important. We need to take care of all of them.
Right.
On the second question, the typical things that come up are rain barrels, fertilizers on your lawn. There are, number of things that can be done. Road salt on your driveway. I won't claim to be an expert, but I know that there are many things that, and frankly, to raise it with their counselors and raise it with the province and, demand that something be done. So there's actions on your own property, but there's actions as a citizen that you can take.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I
you.
appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. I've spent a lot of time over my life at Lake Banook, either with the paddling community, mostly officiating on the water, listening to the athletes when they're crying because they caught a weed with their boat. And these are not only the young children, but the international athletes. Some of the outcomes have sometimes been affected by those weeds on what we often promote as our world-class paddling location here in Nova Scotia. But I just want to understand, picking up on Councillor White's comments, whose role is it to do the education to residents? I'm just not clear on, because you mentioned your group doesn't have a budget, and we all know education costs a lot. And yes, we can do it one citizen at a time or one resident at a time. Are you seeing that as a role for HRM? And I know you're an advocacy group, so I'm just wondering, what role have you been playing? Do you have budget to do that? Do you have people on your organization that are doing that with you, and what more could be done, and who's responsible?
Thank you very much for that question, because it helps me to clarify. So we see as our role fora like this. So we're an expert group, right? And we come up with recommendations, and we speak with staff and with counselors, and hopefully in the future with ministers of the environment, etc. So we're not a public group. We're not a public-facing group. We're an expert advisory group. So that's number one. As to who should be doing it, I do believe HRM has a role, but I think it could also be as a partnership with maybe, Ecology Action or one of those groups, or it won't be us. But I think it does need to be done. And I think it does make sense for HRM to, because you're already doing it, right? There are signs at the lakes now saying, be careful, here's how you identify this stuff. But I think it needs to be ramped up very, very significantly, and especially as relates to the knowledge that the drainage system leads to the lakes. So that is something that is just not well understood, and people may assume, and I think they ought to be entitled to assume, that water gets treated before it goes into a lake. So we have to educate them that that's not the case. And I think that's a first step.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The value of having friends in the audience. So there is a canine, we do have, HRM does have a few programs right around lake health, but I do take your point, but we do have the canines for clean water. There was a weed harvesting program around Lake Banook and Lake Micmac, I think. But I would like to see those programs, throughout all of HRM. as well. So yeah, about how do we share that education around is a really important piece. And I think the other piece of that too is one of the things that, you know, there's stuff that as a resident you can do. And so when we think about what our education campaign, what can you do as a resident? But then what do you do as an HRM in terms of policy and programs? And then what do you do as a province around policy and legislation and enforcement? So we have work to do. That's good.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if that was a question, but thank you.
Seeing no one else on the list, colleagues, if you don't mind, I have some questions and comments that I could make from the chair. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Gaudette, thank you, and to your team and colleagues and friends with you. I appreciate the work. You know, in October we had a campaign where we were all fortunate to be reelected, and every one of us in that campaign had the top of the list the things that we're going to focus on were improved transit and homelessness. And so that was mine also. But along with that was the health of our lakes and Dartmouth was for me. And Councillor Ross is not here today, but he would tell you that's the top of his list also. I thank you for acknowledging some of the great work the municipality has done. And we've done a lot of work, good work, and you mentioned the Lake Watchers program. That actually came from a motion I brought forward to reinstate the lake monitoring that was cut by a former CAO that's no longer with us because his response at the time was that belongs to the province and we shouldn't be doing it. That's been reinstated, and Lake Watchers program I think has been a huge success, so I'm very proud of that. Some other things I wanted to mention too that you didn't mention that I look at success. You know, right now we're looking at the regional plan, and the setback from development on lakes is 20 meters. We're now looking at moving that to 30 meters back. I think that's a huge plus. I brought forward a motion to look at height restrictions around Lake Micmac, similar to Lake Banook, for some of the same reasons. So staff are looking at that right now. We have looked at changing the use of salt around some of our Dartmouth lakes to sand, and we need to do more of that by all means. Our district boundaries change, and so when our boundaries change, I gained even more lakes in Dartmouth, and which I'm proud of that. But I'm learning about a lot of lakes, Outhit Lake and Penhorn Lake, and other things like that too. I do want to just mention some of the things you mentioned and that I hear about all the time. You know, we hear about dog feces in the lakes and throwing it in the drain, like you said. Many complaints of people with that. Numerous of our beaches and Dartmouth are closing on a regular basis. I mean, I think we've had some beaches be closed more than opened. You know, the fertilization you mentioned. You know, I was very surprised in this job to hear that we had on Lake Banook straight pipes still going into Lake Banook. I mean, that's mind-boggling in this day and age. We have straight pipes going into our lakes, and there's less of that now, but that was still an issue. You know, storm runoff on our highway, Lake Charles. We've been working on this for a number of years. Kendra McKenzie's here with Halifax Water. She's been involved in many of those meetings where it's been discovered. We thought it was a certain business that was causing the runoff into Lake Charles, but we discovered it was actually the 107. And so the province did step up and help us work on that. We're trying to address that. It hasn't been fully resolved, but that is something that we're looking at. You know, the discussion around the table with my colleagues here today about, you know, well, whose responsibility are the lakes? Well, it's everyone's responsibility, but the mandate of responsibility for lakes is the province of Nova Scotia. But there's been a reluctance there because there's thousands and thousands of lakes from Meat Cove to Yarmouth, and you know, the fear we've heard, not officially, but we read between the lines, that we do something with one lake, we have to do it with all the lakes. And as they should, but here we are. So we've had lots of conversation in this room about what's in our wheelhouse. I look at Councillor Steele, and she's brought that up several times. Is this our mandate? It could be a different topic. And, you know, the lakes fall into that category. But the challenge we have, if we don't do it, who's going to do it, right? You know, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change is a good Dartmouth boy. He's a Dartmouthian. Right? And so he's game, and he has stepped up when we've asked on a number of occasions. So all that, there's no questions here, but a statement I'd like to make, and maybe one question from my colleague to the left, John. You know, the ask here is a frank education and campaign. You know, I'm wondering, is there an opportunity to look at within the realm of the environment and climate change team to maybe explore that a little bit further?
Thanks for the question. And yes, our Environment and Climate Change team does regular awareness campaigns, and this is something I'll take away and check on and make sure that the lakes are being included in that. And your point about partnership with Ecology Action Center is a good takeaway point as well.
Fantastic, John. Thank you. And I'll commit to following up on that also. Our lakes throughout our municipality, all 16 districts are precious. We could argue, the lakes in Dartmouth are more important, and we can have that argument. But I will, in some ways. But there's something unique about our lakes in Dartmouth, especially when you look at Lake Charles that flows into Lake Micmac, that flows into Lake McNook, and then it flows into our harbor, right? And that world-class, paddling. We just had an announcement from the federal government, a $2.3 million investment into one of the boat clubs, right? And one quick story, and we'll end the conversation here, but we had the World Paddling Championships not that long ago, a few years ago. I met somebody from Ukraine, and he told me when his team found out they were coming here, they were excited, and they didn't say we're coming to Canada. They didn't say they were coming to Nova Scotia. They didn't say they were coming to Dartmouth. They said they were coming to Lake Bannock. Nice. And he said they have a poster at their club back in Ukraine that says Lake Bannock. So that gives me goosebumps to even to share that right now. So our lakes are extremely important. I thank you to you and your team for advocating. I truly appreciate it. You heard the commitment from John and myself. We'll follow up on that campaign and see where that lands. Thank you very much. All right, folks, we're going to move on to. I encourage you folks to stick around, Mr. Gaudette and your colleagues, because the next topic may be of an interest to you also. Next up is the Halifax water fluoridation in HRM, and we have Kenda McKenzie from Halifax Water. Kenda, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you for having us here to give a presentation on fluoride and some of the recent challenges we faced and provide that information to this group. So I have Dr. Wendy Krakozik here with us. She's the Director of Environment, Health and Safety, and she's going to just give an overview of the fluoride system that we have and what we've been coordinating with different agencies. And then we'll be open to any questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Doctor. Good to see you.
Great. Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. So as Kenda mentioned, I'm going to go over a bit of fluoridation history at Halifax Water, and I'm going to start with talking about the regulatory environment around fluoridation because it's a little bit nuanced, and to try to give you some context around there, where we've come from, where we are currently, and where we're moving with fluoridation in the future. And so to start off with, I just want to visit our purpose. So the Halifax Water purpose is to supply and safeguard sustainable, high-quality water services. And so from a drinking water perspective, most of the compounds that are regulated to ensure that we provide safe drinking water come from Health Canada. So Health Canada develops guidelines and they set maximum acceptable concentrations for different drinking water components. And then those are adopted by Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change, and then they become regulation in the province. And that is what we follow from a regulatory perspective. So that's in general how drinking water quality works within the province. But when it comes to fluoride, it's a little bit different because the addition of fluoride is actually not a regulatory requirement in Nova Scotia. So, and across most of Canada. So fluoridation in Nova Scotia is regulated through Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change through operating approvals, but only the maximum acceptable concentration for fluoride is regulated by Nova Scotia Environment, not the optimal concentration. So the maximum acceptable concentration is one which above we would see health implications, and so that limit is 1.5 milligrams per liter. And so as per our approvals to operate, if we were to exceed 1.5 milligrams per liter in our drinking water, we would be reporting that to Nova Scotia Environment as a non-compliance from a regulatory perspective. However, when municipalities choose to fluoridate, often it is done at the optimal concentration, which is 0.7 milligrams per liter. That's the optimal concentration by Health Canada, and that value is not regulated by Nova Scotia Environment. And so the blurb that I have at the bottom of this slide is taken from the Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change website that talks again about this sort of difference in fluoridation versus other drinking water quality parameters, where it's really the decision that's made by a municipality in collaboration with the province, and it's not a regulated process. And so moving on from the regulatory environment, just to provide you a bit of history on fluoridation at Halifax Water. So Halifax Water has been fluoridating at some level since the 1950s at the encouragement of the Public Health Office throughout that time. And so we target the optimal dose of fluoridation at 0.7 milligrams per liter, which again is that Health Canada optimal dose for optimum dental health benefits. And so we fluoridate at both the Pockwalk and the Lake Major water supplies. And so those in the figure on the right here are shown in the teal color and the orange color. We do have other small systems that we operate, and none of those have ever had fluoridation. And it largely is due to the size and complexity of the systems and the complexity of a fluoridation system and the occupational health and safety requirements around fluoridation systems. And so we have never added fluoride to any of the small systems. It's just the two large supplies. And so now I'll talk a little bit about more of the recent history around fluoridation. And so the last time that the idea of fluoridation was visited at the board level was in 2013 and 2014. So over time, as we operate, we tend to get customers that call in and have complaints or inquiries around fluoridation. And usually this is in response to wanting to cease fluoridation within the community. And so in 2013, there was a large influx of these types of inquiries from customers. And there was a letter that was submitted with the title Halifax Water Should Stop Poisoning Us. And this was distributed to media outlets as well. And so in response to this, the IWK Health Centre, the Faculty of Dentistry at Dalhousie, and the Nova Scotia Dental Association submitted a fluoride information package to the Halifax Water Board following that letter. And in this, they highlighted the importance of fluoride in preventing tooth decay. After this letter was received, Halifax Water provided an information report to the board, noting that Halifax Water continues to support fluoridation of drinking water as a beneficial public health practice for decreasing dental cavities and protecting oral health. And that recommendation was then endorsed by the board in April of 2014. And so this was the last time that fluoridation was brought up at the board level at Halifax Water. And on the right here is an example of that letter that was provided in 2014. So one thing I want to focus on a little bit is the notification and the level of service. And so at the time when fluoridation was endorsed in 2014, there was no establishment at that point in time of the level of service and notification requirements. And so Halifax Water continued to follow past practice. And so here it's important to note that where fluoride addition is not a regulatory requirement, there has never been, historically, there has not been redundancy in the fluoride delivery systems at the facilities. And fluoride, the product that we use is a corrosive product, and it often results in leaks and challenges with operating and maintaining the infrastructure. And so historically, when the systems have gone down due to maintenance requirements, they are down for a period of time, and this has not necessarily been discussed with customers in the past. This was how things operated in the past. And so I want to talk a little bit about our notification requirements around general drinking water parameters. And so in our approval to operate, we notify Nova Scotia Environment when there's a change in fluoridation processes. And so when this is either turned on or shut off. And this is in line with any other process that we have within the drinking water system, that we have a requirement to notify Nova Scotia Environment when we have changes to the process. In general, Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change is the conduit for us to the Medical Officer of Health and through environmental health consultants and for any public health related issues associated with drinking water. So if we have a non-compliance of a parameter, we would report this to our regulator, and they would be the conduit to public health, and then any advisories that would be required or follow-up work or communications that would be required would come from Nova Scotia Environment, depending on the issue. And so over time, Halifax Water has reported all changes to fluoridation to Nova Scotia Environment and was operating as though this information was being communicated to the medical officer of health. So similar to any other change in the process that we would have had, anytime the fluoride system was taken down for maintenance, we communicated that to Nova Scotia Environment. And so as I mentioned, with the level of service, where fluoride is not a regulatory requirement, these systems are not redundant. So when there is an issue with the system, it is taken offline for a period of time until it can be fixed and put back into operation. So now I'll talk a little bit about the recent timelines around interruptions in fluoridation practice at both of our facilities. And I'll start talking about Pocwock, which is our J.D. Klein water supply plant, which feeds the Halifax and surrounding areas. And so we've had 2 recent interruptions in fluoride due to issues with the delivery systems. And so in August 2021, we paused fluoridation because we needed to upgrade the fluoride storage tank, and there were equipment failures as well. And so this information was communicated to the province, and fluoride was taken offline and out of service from August 2021 until July of 2022. It came back online for a period of time, and then there were further leaks that were discovered within the system. And so the system was taken offline in May 2023 and remained out of service until the work was completed to recommission the system and fix all of the leaks, which we were able to get back online in December of 2024. So if we now move to Lake Major, and I'm not going to go through all of this in detail. There's a lot of information here, but really it's to show the complexity in what's happened at Lake Major and the changes that happened over time that continued the interruption in fluoridation service. And so in 2019, there was a requirement for additional chemical storage for alum, which is the product that we use as the main drinking water chemical for coagulation at the treatment plant. And there was the existing tanks were inspected to determine the years of life remaining on those systems. And at that point in time, there was significant life left in the fluoride tank. However, there was some stress that showed on a flange on the tank. So at that time, we kept the fluoride system in service, and we proceeded with adding an additional alum storage tank to meet operational resiliency requirements at the time for increased chemical dosages. In February of 2020, further investigation determined that there was an issue with the flange on the fluoride tank, and Halifax Water decided then to revisit the idea of replacing the fluoride tank. Then in April of 2020, a roof leak caused some equipment damage, and the fluoride system was turned off. And the operational decision at that point was made to keep it off until the tank was replaced. And again, this information was communicated to the province at that time. Then over time, through June to December, engineering work began on decommissioning and removing the existing system. And there was also a study commissioned to look at the possibility to move away from the product that we were using to one that may have been easier to handle, but that study revealed that we should continue using the product that we were using at the time due to cost and labor requirements. So engineering services for this work continued. And in 2021, we had 90% drawings for the fluoride tank that came in, but then we had COVID-19 restrictions that caused construction delays within the province. And internally, the fluoride tank replacement project was merged with another project that was similar in scope and nature, which extended the timeline for the project. So in 2022, there was a detailed design for the fluoride replacement tank and the dedicated service water project, and that went out to tender. And in 2023, things were proceeding with the replacement of the fluoride tank, but we did have some slowdowns. We had a departmental reorganization and a new project manager assigned to the project, which also resulted in some delays in tendering. So all of this time, there were delays, but the project was continuing with the intent to reinstate fluoridation. Then in the summer of 2023, you may all remember we had 2 heavy rainfall events in July and August. These heavy rainfall events caused significant flooding throughout the region, but it also caused a significant change in source water quality in Lake Major, which is the supply for the Lake Major water supply plant. In this time, alum, which is the main chemical that we use, the dose of that product nearly doubled in order to maintain our finished water compliance and operational resilience. And so this put a strain on the existing alum capacity at the plant. And so at that time, in order to ensure future operational resiliency, there was a direction change in that project, and it was decided to replace the fluoride tank with an alum tank so that we could meet our regulatory compliance obligations. And again, Nova Scotia Environment was notified of this decision. At that time, we were going through a larger project, water supply enhancement program, which is looking at longer-term infrastructure upgrades for both of our water facilities, and the decision was made to put the fluoride system into that project for future reinstatement. Then in 2024-25, the raw water quality returned back to pre-flood levels. The project was tendered and the contract executed at this point for an additional alum tank. And we had a meeting in October where we realized the medical officer of health had not been informed of the status of fluoridation, and we then began discussions with their office as well as with the Halifax Water Board on the fluoridation status. And we continue to discuss options to resume fluoridation. And so this is a figure just to give you a little bit of perspective on how much the water quality has changed since the commissioning of the Lake Major Water Supply Plant. So this is a plot of the cumulative alum concentration over time, with each year shown in a different color, and the months of the year down on the x-axis. So you can see down at the bottom, the darker colors represent when the plant was first commissioned, and we were using around 200,000 kilograms of alum per year. And by the early 2000s, we were up in around 600,000. And in more recent times, last year, we were over 1 million kilograms. So that's over 5 times where we started when we commissioned the plant. And that's really driven the need for adding alum into the storage capacity within the plant. And this becomes important as we go through some of these future fluoride reinstatement projects for Lake Major. So we currently have 3 different options in order to reinstate fluoride, and we're also balancing the reinstatement of fluoride with minimizing operational risk and resiliency of the treatment plant. And so our first option here is to pivot the ongoing alum tank installation and go back to using that space for fluoride. So this is feasible. However, this would create operational resilience and compliance risks if we were to have another water quality disruption and a change in water quality. And so there's a very small footprint within the Lake Major Water Supply Plant that's available for chemical storage. And so there is no option within that existing space to put both tanks. It's either fluoride or it's alum. So for this particular option, we could reinstate fluoride within about a year or less than a year at an approximate cost of $500,000. But this does not allow for alum redundancy. Option 2, we've done a little bit of work to look at additional locations within the plant where we could install a fluoride system, and we could do that by moving an existing area for a different chemical, which we use for corrosion control. And we could move that to another location in the facility. That's an easier product to manage and from an occupational health and safety perspective. So we could move that somewhere else and put the fluoride tank in that place. So if we proceeded with this option, it's a little bit longer timeline because we're dealing with two chemical systems, and it's a higher cost, again, because we're dealing with moving 2 chemical systems. But it does give us that operational resiliency by allowing us to continue with the alum tank installation. The last option is that which we would have followed with the Water Supply Enhancement Program, looking at these longer-term upgrades to the treatment plant and installing fluoridation infrastructure as part of those long-term upgrades. So again, the timelines here at this point, some of the work at Lake Major is a little bit further out, and we're looking at about 5 to 10 years in terms of getting that operational. The cost of the fluoride system at that point would be in and around that $500,000 range. And again, we would be able to have that alum redundancy at that point as well. So those are the 3 options that we have in front of us at Lake Major to reinstate fluoride. And so just want to talk a little bit more about some other costs and considerations of fluoridation. So just to give you a sense of the operational costs of fluoridation, for Pockwalk, we spend about $80,000 to $100,000 per year. At Lake Major, it's $30,000 to $36,000 per year, and that translates roughly to 30 to 40 cents per person annually. So operationally, that's the cost we're looking at per year. And then I have this figure on the right that looks at the number of fluoride tickets that we receive per year. So these are customer inquiries around fluoride. And as you can see there, in 2013, we had a large uptick in numbers, and that's really what drove that initial endorsement by the board for continued fluoridation practice. And then you can see the uptick again in this year in 2024 when we discussed that we hadn't been fluoridating for a few years at Lake Major. And so I just also want to note that, there's the split opinion with our customers around this issue. Historically, the inquiries we get are usually around stopping fluoridation practices, and this year that has been a split opinion as the information has been released. And so just now focusing on some of our next steps. So we are seeking input from the Halifax Water Board of Commissioners on fluoridation strategies at our next board meeting. And we're looking at revisiting the 2014 endorsement of fluoridation, given all the information that we have recently and where we are. We're looking at reinstatement options for Lake Major, so those 3 options that I showed you earlier. Also talking about the level of service requirements and the redundancy requirements that we're proposing for fluoridation systems. And then lastly, also looking at notification procedures to ensure that we're notifying both the medical and dental community as well as our customers of any interruptions in the fluoridation process. And so we have since then instituted a way for us to update our Board of Commissioners routinely on the status of fluoridation at both of our water supplies. And we have been working with the Medical Officer of Health on determining customer notification timelines that would be relevant to allow customers to adjust their behavior knowing the status of fluoridation. So is it that we should be notifying customers within a day of an interruption in fluoridation, or is it more a month or 3 months or 6 months? So we're working with the Medical Officer of Health and their office on that. And really that's to ensure that both the customers and the medical and dental community have the information they need in order to adjust both customer habits as well as the programs that the province has around fluoridation, including the fluoridation application in schools. And with that, we can open for questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I know we've had a lot of interest in this topic, and I believe there's lots of folks that are watching online too. So now is the opportunity for the committee and the visiting councillors to bring forward any questions they might have. Committee, what is your wish? Do you have any questions? Well, I can start. Oh, no, go ahead. Councillor Young, you step up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions. I just want to know, is there any correlation between fluoridation and cancer in the areas closest to the watersheds in Lake Major and in Pockwalk? And my second one is, it kind of falls on the same line. Is there a difference in the quantity or quality of the fluoridation in communities closer to the proximity of the Lake Major plant and the Pockwalk plant than it is in other communities furthest away in the same service area?
I think I can try to understand and answer the question. With respect to the health risks associated with fluoridation, I would refer to our medical colleagues to answer that question. With respect to difference in the fluoridation concentrations with respect to location, yes. So within fluoride is what we call a conservative substance. So when it's added at the treatment plant, the concentration at which it's added at the treatment plant is the same concentration that you would find at the extents of the system. So we added at 0.7 milligrams per liter is our target, and that is also what you would experience at the far extents of the distribution system. So it's the same concentration throughout.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor White.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I was just trying to understand the reporting. It's not a regulatory requirement. And So have you been reporting every time there's an on-off, or is it just sometimes? that it
We
gets-
have always reported to our regulator when we turn it on and when we turn it off.
Okay.
And so a requirement of our approval to operate is when we have a change in a treatment process that we report it to the regulator. And so that's what we have been doing.
Even though it's not a regulated requirement.
Yes,
Like-
because there's also requirements around treatment process changes within the plant. So the compound itself isn't regulated, the concentration isn't regulated below the 1.5 milligrams
Right,
per liter.
right.
But when we have a change in our treatment process, we report that to the regulator.
Okay. So the conversation about how to report, that's what you're going forward with the commission, like if you should be going directly to the public health, or if there should be a change in the way it's reported? Is that
Exactly.
what you're
Yes.
getting at?
Yes. And so we're establishing those communication channels and what those timelines should be.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, my second question was about, just at the end, you mentioned fluoridation in schools. I'm not familiar with that. Just could you talk about that. And then people changing their behaviors. What would that be? Like getting fluoride at the dentist, brushing your teeth more? What is it?
Yeah, again, I would defer to our health colleagues on some of those questions, but
Okay.
the customer behaviors would be exactly those types of things. So, a customer may opt out of fluoride treatments at a dentist if they have a fluoridated supply. And so if they're aware that they do not have fluoridation, they could change those behaviors. And in terms of the public health programs around fluoridation, one that I am aware of is in rural communities that don't have access to fluoridated supplies. There is a program to provide fluoride application within schools.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation here at the Environment Committee. I don't sit on this committee. I am on the Halifax Water Board, and here to just partake in this dialogue. I mean, it is one that we've spent a considerable amount of time discussing at the Halifax Water Board and the Environment, Health and Safety Committee, and it treads into lots of different territory, as we can tell already at the discussion here. It has both to do with health and with a water utility that's highly regulated by the province, about a substance that is, from a health perspective, isn't regulated, only from a quantity perspective. So, like so many things, we're starting to tread into a discussion about, things that are outside of our jurisdiction, but in which we play an important role. And I think it's important that when it comes to questions about health, we realize that is not within the capacity of Halifax Water or the Water Board. That really, as has been stated, deferring to the Medical Office of Health is the place where those conversations belong. For us, it's really about understanding, the processes and, why it wasn't broadly reported that the fluoridation was not being added to the water, and the public perception of this. I think a lot of work has gone into presenting why that happened, and that we're very much at a point of looking to make sure that communications are better going forward, that we're not just assuming that when it has, something like fluoridation, which has, really belongs to the Medical Office of Health, not just assuming that message is getting put forward, but finding out what are the proper lines of communication. And that framework and that system doesn't currently exist. One might assume it does, but it actually doesn't. So I think that we're making good progress in trying to establish that, so that, in the future, when there are incidents like this, there's a protocol. We know who to call. We know who should be sending out the messaging, and whose responsibility is that when it's a health issue and not a water quality issue. So, there is lots to dive in here, and I look forward to, the ongoing conversation here at this committee. And I think this is a really good opportunity to, further talk about this publicly, and look at what we are going to do as a water board, as a water commission, because there are real costs involved in this, and I just putting this on the table for discussion as well. You know, there's the capital costs as well as the ongoing operating costs, which I don't think were captured in the presentation here, or did I miss that? Maybe they were. Okay, sorry, I might have missed that. But the ongoing operational costs, and so, you know, whose responsibility should that be? And is it a water quality issue, or is it a health issue? And I'll just leave that there and look forward to the rest of the conversation. I just wanted to provide some context of what's been happening at the Water Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hartling.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you so much for the presentation. I want to follow up, I think, a bit on the communication between Halifax Water and then the board that many councillors sit on. So what I'm stumbling over how in I mean, you know the numbers better than I do, both at POCWalk and you know, it's been years. Was that never brought up in any board meeting? And to follow up, it seems like the fluoride was, you know, fluoride had been taken out to make accommodations for alum, which is necessary, and that, you know, you had to make accommodations and purchase new equipment in order for you to meet your water quality targets. How is that not brought up at budget, even if it wasn't like the? I guess I'm just failing to understand how it could have gone on for as long as it did without the municipality understanding. I understand that there is no direct, you know, so we turned it off and now we need to tell HRM about it. I do understand that happened, that communication happens between you and the province. Having said that, I'm still kind of surprised that at no moment in time was the municipality brought to awareness, and given the number of opportunities, and particularly at budget when these things would have had to be addressed because of budgetary reasons. So those are the two questions that I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor, through you to the councillor. I'll try and capture some of those. So at our board meetings, we have regular parameters that we do provide updates to, and they've always been focused on the regulatory parameters that maintain compliance with our treatment plants and what is going to our customers. So I think it, you know, looking back to your question of how did this not come up before, I think the focus was on the pieces of the treatment plant operations from a water and a wastewater perspective that the board needed to have that lens or sight line to compliance perspectives. So unfortunately, the fluoride was not one of those parameters that was included in the reports. And however, now that we look at it, it's in there now. Okay. So going forward, that was an immediate corrective action. So it's those reports too are publicly available on our website after leading up to our board meetings. And so there's the just a simple POCWalk has fluoride now, and Lake Major still is without fluoride. To some of the operational issues. As we look at, you know, we want to make sure we did not make conscious decisions, nor did our board, to say we are not going to provide fluoride. It was always due to operational requirements, failure of equipment, replacement of equipment. And depending on the order of magnitude of some of those replacements, in some cases, the expenditures might not, it might have been a general manager approved expenditure or something that was ordered from a replacement perspective. So it might not show up as a full line item in a budget because of the size and order of magnitude of the project. It might have been in just regular operation and maintenance of the equipment. Right. So it's, you know, over the years there were reports of various scales and magnitude to order and replace equipment, and then again from the communications outward, as we noted and have learned a valuable lesson. we were always kind of relying on getting that direction from the regulators as to whether or not we should be providing communications outward to the community. We acknowledge now that that was not the appropriate position to take, and going forward, we're going to be openly sharing that with our customers. And so I think I've...
Yep.
Okay.
I appreciate that
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gillis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kenda and Wendy, for coming. Thank you guys for the presentation. Just a couple questions. Are there any negative effects in starting the fluoride, pausing, starting again, stopping again? That's kind of my first question. And my next question's sort of been answered already, but who informs the public? So Halifax Water informs Nova Scotia Environment Climate Change. Is it up to them to inform the public? Because that seems to be missing. I think a lot of the comments I got was that the public wasn't informed, and if they were informed, they could make appropriate decisions. And the last thing, just a point of clarification. So as of March of right now, we have fluoride being added, but only to the Pockwalk one, right? Not Lake Major. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor, through you to the councillor. So again, with the starting and pausing, I can't speak to any medical issues or concerns around that. I think to what Wendy had mentioned before about the concentration is the same throughout the facility, throughout the system as it leaves the treatment plant. I believe it would just get into how, whether or not it's there or not, and getting into those conversations about customers being aware and being able to make that informed decision with their dental care provider. And so anything more in depth than that, I would have to defer to a medical professional on that impact to dental health. And then when it comes to the communication, that is with us. That is Halifax Water. We are going to take full ownership of that, and going forward, making sure that our customers are aware of whether or not there is a pause in the provision of fluoride, and we will be setting up what are those parameters to kind of your initial question. If fluoride is paused for a day, we need to sort out with the medical officer and the dental professionals. Does that really mean there's a significant impact that people need to make different changes or different choices with their dental health? Or is it the impact isn't noticeable if it's 2 weeks? Like trying to figure out that so that we can have that communications. But initially, if, for example, the fluoride was reinstated in December for our Pockwalk customers, if that was to stop, we would immediately put out a communication about that.
Okay. Going through the timeline there, because it looks like it's mainly been offline from August 2021, then came back online for not quite a year, then offline again, but okay. And that answers everything. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Chair. Thank you, Kenda. Thank you, Wendy. So, colleagues, I am on the Water Commission and I am Vice Chair. So, just full disclosure there. But you know what? Every time I get this presentation, there's a little piece again that I pick up. That's different. But I think it's really interesting. So, councillors have all got letters and emails from the public and from the Dental Association saying, we need to have fluoride in the water. And as a regulated utility, and fluoride is not regulated, one of the things that residents are asking is, why isn't it regulated? And now I know the answer, and it's in there, but I think that it's good to give it the airtime about, why doesn't the province regulate fluoride then in all of our water treatment plants? if it is the right thing to do, if the medical officer of health says it's the right thing to do. Now, as many emails that I get saying in support of it, probably a third are not in support of fluoride. They would rather get it at their dentist, or they don't agree with it at all. So we have to understand that not everybody is saying that we want fluoride in our water. I'm on a well. I'm kind of all right. Don't need the fluoride. So I guess the short version is, why hasn't the province mandated it? Because if they did, as a cost recovery utility, then the costs would become part of what the ratepayers do that gets approved through the Utility and Review Board. So at this point, it is not something that there's a cost recovery for. So our ratepayers are paying for it, right?
As they say, this just in, just before the meeting started, the medical officer of health had reached out to the CAO, literally just after lunch. And it appears that there might be a bit of a broader communication about to start with different municipalities. So we will be staying close with that and what our interaction is going to be through that conduit as well. So there's probably a bit more communications to come on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Steele.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I have I guess a couple of comments. Maybe there's a question in here as well. I think I too am on the water board, and I just wanted to make the point that while you're not responding to the questions around health impacts and things, you certainly did bring in experts to speak to the board, and I think it's good for the public to know that the experts came in and there was a robust discussion. So really important. I want to pick up on just a comment that Councillor Cuddle made earlier, that fluoridation has its costs, just in terms of the cost to the utility. And I think some of the health experts that came in, and they said there's costs on the other side without it, and they were quite clear on that. So just to be clear on that. And then I want to comment just on your comment about the public response. Up until a certain date, you said in your presentation, the public was opposed, or the people you were hearing from were opposed. And then you said now it's perhaps more balanced. And I just would like assurance that you're not making your decisions based on public opinion, which sometimes the loudest voices are those that are opposed to things, rather than those of us that assume that things are in place. Like people assume the wastewater stuff is being treated before it goes into the lake. People assumed, like I did, that the water was being fluoridated. So can you just comment kind of on the last one about I've always had a little trouble with that particular public opinion said this and now it's saying this, because I don't think that's how you make your decisions, but it just kind of leaves me feeling a little vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Deputy Mayor, to the councillor, yes, we are not making our business decisions and operations decisions on the public opinion. It is a common question that we were receiving and wanted to try and give a bit of context about what our customers are saying in the presentation. And so we were just trying to capture some of that to give some context, because it was a common request from those that we gave the presentation to. And so right now, the direction from our board from 2014 is still in place. And so the direction is to provide fluoride. And now it's just a matter of how do we work that into the operations of the facilities to make sure that is still in place. So we will continue to do that until we are told otherwise, from whatever perspective that is, but it would have to come from our board to give us direction not to, or from one of the regulators as well. And so, and we do want to just there was mention about cost and everything. The costs are being borne by the customers, and we want to highlight again that this is an unregulated parameter. And so, we will be, we may receive questions when we go to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. We don't know on who should be paying for this. So it is an interesting conversation where it's not regulated.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other names on the board, if it's, I do now see a name. Councillor Hartling, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up, I noticed that at the end of your presentation, you had 3 different options that you could pursue to put fluoridation back. I'm wondering who is reviewing that? How do you move that forward? How is that decision being made? I don't expect that it's one that'll happen here, obviously, but I think that most people would want to know that there is a path forward. I'm just curious if you could help us understand your next steps and who will be speaking to it next.
Yes, certainly. Through you, Deputy Mayor, to the councillor. So we are going to be bringing that forward to our board as part of the recommendation and follow-up report. Staff are strongly in support of proceeding with using the space at Lake Major for the alum tank, just because it is critical to the provision of safe potable drinking water, which we are mandated and required to. So from a system resiliency, that is the option 1 as it was outlined to use that space for fluoride. We're not recommending that.
So you're looking at 2 or 3.
2 or 3. And so it would be similar to any recommendation report that comes forward to council. We're going to be bringing that to our board to say we are recommending option 2 because from a cost and a practicality and earlier installation, we can do that. An alternative would be option 3 and option 1, and then we would be stating why we're in favor of 2 and not 1 and 3. So it goes through our process at our board meeting to give us direction on that.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no others on the board, if it's okay with you, colleagues, I wouldn't mind making some comments or questions from the chair. Wendy and Kenda, thank you very much. Many of us, I know I received lots of emails and phone calls, and people stop me in the grocery store and saying, what the heck's going on? And I heard a lot of that, a lot of concern, a lot of fear, and even some anger. And my comment is, well, hang on, let's get the information. Let's find out what's going on. So I appreciate it very much that you're both here today. And I understand about the issues of equipment and need replacement, the cost, the logistics, the requirement for redundancy, the regulation and not being regulated, the challenge with technology. I hear all of that. The challenge that I have, and many of your customers, our residents have had, as Councillor Hartling alluded to, is that not being informed. Yeah, and I'm surprised that you did follow regulations and you informed the province, and for even the province, and not to chime in and share that with us or share that with residents. It's surprising. I realize there's regulations, but what's the right thing to do? And not informing your customers. It's surprising to me also. In the opposition of fluoride, look, I've heard it over the years of being on council, and I'm glad that Councillor Steele made the comment about not making a decision based on public opinion. We need to make decisions based on data, facts, science, right? That's what's most important. We look at what happened in Calgary, right? Calgary kind of led the way of not having fluoride in their drinking water, and now they're reversing that role. And now we're hearing from the science, from the experts, from the health department, that was a negative impact to a whole generation of youth not having fluoride in their water. I'm glad to hear that you're leaning towards option 2, which is a recommendation of the board, and mainly because if it's a 2-year time span. Option 3 being 5 to 10 years. That's a whole generation of kids not having fluoride in their water. And I understand about the redundancy, and that's because of the lack of redundancy. That's why we're in this situation, right? So I understand that wholeheartedly. You know, I'm one of those people that opted out. I opt out when I go to the dentist of fluoride. I don't want fluoride. I don't like the taste of my mouth, but I know I get it in my drinking water. But until we found out, I didn't realize I wasn't getting that fluoride in my drinking water. Councillor Cuddle, you alluded to the the cost. You're right. There's the capital cost, the operational cost, and Councillor Steele alluded to it. And I wrote down here is the cost of a whole generation of youth not having fluoride in their water, which concerns me the most. I'm really glad, Kenda, that I hear lessons are learned. I hear it in your voice. I hear it in your communication when I've engaged you, that you realize maybe the right decisions weren't made, and now we have going forward. And I'm also glad that you're continuing to listen to the science and the health. I will mention to colleagues at a future Environment Committee meeting, I will be inviting to this committee folks from the Nova Scotia Dental Association, along with someone from the Department of Health, hopefully the medical officer at the same meeting, hopefully, so we can continue on that path that many of you had around the medical side of it too. So that's will be one of my follow-ups from today's meeting. Last, Ken, here's the only question I have. Where was our drinking water in years gone by? Remember this, but can you tell us where we stand in relationship to other drinking water across our country when we look at rating our drinking water in comparison to other municipalities?
Thank you. I think it's the best, but sorry, but in all seriousness, in what I guess from quality that and I.
So, I remember years gone by that there was a ranking and a rating of water, our drinking water, and it was in the best. And that's the only point I wanted to make, that, we have a very strong, that we should be very proud of our drinking water here in HRM and to be proud of that. So that was my only comment. So I agree with you. It's the best. This is a piece that I think things went sideways, and I appreciate you recognizing your leadership of saying, hey, we have to do better, and that communication piece to our residents, your customers, needs to be improved, and it looks like it's going in that direction. So thank you very much to both of you. Seeing no one else on the board, thanks so much. And you're welcome to stick around, because our next thing we love so much are trees. So feel free to stick around. All right, next up, folks, we're moving into staff reports. We have next on the agenda 13.1.1 Urban Forest Management Plan. Oh, sorry. Oh, public participation. Sorry. See, you earned your money right there. See, I was picking on our lawyer earlier that she had to earn her keep, and she is earning her keep. Thank you very much. We do have public participation, so we have nobody on the sign-up sheet, and there's nobody online. And so I'll call 3 times. If anybody here in Chambers would like to step forward and speak to this committee, they're welcome to do so. So is there anybody who would like to address the committee? Is there anyone else who would like to speak? And third and last time, is there anyone else who likes to speak? Thank you. Well done. You earned all your money. Good job. Thank you. So we'll close to the public participation piece. Now we'll move on to the Urban Forest Management Plan. And we have Crispin Wood and his team. Crispin, welcome, sir. Have you spoken to this committee before since you've been here?
I have.
You have?
Yes.
Good. See,
a couple times.
Good. Well, you're always welcome here, of course, Crispin. The floor is yours. And then I believe you have a presentation. And then after the presentation is put on the floor, we'll put the motion on the floor. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Oh, is it working? Yep. Thank you very much. So for those of you who haven't met me, Crispin Wood, Manager of Urban Forestry. I have with me here to my right, Heba Gerard. She is our urban forest environmental professional. To my far right, we have Dr. Peter Dunker, who is probably familiar to some of you. He is on our consultants project team. He is also probably one of Canada's foremost urban forest academics, not to put too many feathers in his cap. And to my left is Tyler Searles. He is the project manager from Diamond Head Consulting, the team that we engaged to help us develop the update to the Urban Forest Master Plan, now titled the Urban Forest Management Plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Tyler. He's going to give a presentation. And then the 4 of us are here at Council's convenience for questions.
Thank you, Crispin. I'm excited to be here alongside the team this afternoon and speaking with you, members of the Environment and Sustainability Committee, on Halifax's, or HRM's, Urban Forest Management Plan as it sort of works its way through the final stages in its development. It's been just over a year getting the document to this point, and a lot of effort has gone into getting it to where it is, both on the part of HRM staff and the project team. Peter Dunker, myself, the larger team that supports me, as well as sub-consultants Delvina, MSVU's Delvina Bernard, and Pipicon Petaquin, our Indigenous consultant. And I'm going to dive right in. So in terms of format, I'll sort of work through an overview of the project, where it is, what it is, and why it was initiated. And then I'll move in to the engagement program, its design, and some of the sort of key insights we garnered through that process. And then finally, we'll move into the plan itself, and principally the strategic framework, which is really sort of the nuts and bolts of the document. So as I mentioned, we're a little over 12 months or so into plan development at this point. That's included 2 phases of both internal and external engagement, which we'll get into a little further in just a couple minutes, but also multiple iterations of the draft and considerable background analysis and technical review has gone into the development of this thing to this point. And so before really getting into it, it's important to clarify what I mean when I sort of describe an urban forest. And the transect on the slide before you sort of illustrates the range of uses that the urban forest exists within per the definition adopted through the plan. And I'd sort of say above all else, the major takeaway here is that urban forests are not just a collection of isolated trees within urban areas. It's more of an ecosystem. And so the best management practices consider not only the individual, but all of the ecosystem components as well. And that includes, our urban soils, our surface hydrology, and the qualities and construction of our modified urban growing environments that the trees grow within. And I'd just say for those that sort of have knowledge of the preceding Urban Forest Master Plan, which I'm also going to dive into just in a moment, per the Urban Forest Management Plan's definition, the urban forest extends into HRM's rural areas as well. And so the Urban Forest Management Plan is not the HRM's first guiding forest management document. The 2013 Urban Forest Master Plan came more than a decade ago. It was, in its day, a leading edge plan, not only within the Maritimes or Canada, but also sort of on a continent-wide basis. The document was the result of collaborative efforts of not only HRM staff, but Dalhousie's Peter Dunker and his lab, and some of the master plan team, then students and researchers have actually gone on to work amongst and continue to work amongst HRM staff. It was an award-winning document in many respects. It was sort of a crown jewel of a program that was widely regarded as a leader in Canadian urban forest management, and the relationships and community support generated through its development in many cases persist today. And its legacy is why Halifax is a tree city of the world and a community of trees. The master plan spoke to a whole range of actions that included policy to operations, community planning, procedures, and community engagement. I think practically speaking, beyond its adoption, it became mostly a planting document, and that's something we'll talk a little bit more about as we move through the presentation. But in the 10 years since its adoption, much has changed in the Urban Forest Management Plan's program landscape. And it's now just time to update that document and reflect on the successes and shortcomings of the master plan before it. And so enter the Urban Forest Management Plan. This plan will guide the management of the Halifax Regional Municipality's urban forests over the next 25 years. That 25-year shelf life does also include sort of a standard review process. So the document will be looked at well before the 25-year mark and sort of on a regular interval. And it'll provide the same sort of guidance as did the preceding plan, packaged a little differently this time and certainly updated to reflect current context, challenges, and program realities now facing the program. It's a little on the why as to why HRM has this program at all, and the answer is really fairly simple. Urban forests provide a wealth of benefits to the communities they exist within. There's a huge range of research out there now to support this point, and I won't list every service in favor of time, but I will say that through community engagement, we heard very clearly that HRM's residents and its community enjoys their tree-lined streets, their local park where they walk their dog. We heard from Canadian newcomers that they found community or sense of belonging in treed places in HRM's parks far from their countries of origin. Trees reduce the urban heat island effect. They attenuate overland flows during peak storm events. They provide habitat for animals. They sequester carbon. They provide certain cultural values to Indigenous peoples. The list is long. For many years, urban forest management programs like Halifax's existed without much coordinated direction or a strategic plan. Documents like an urban forest management plan and the urban forest master plan before it help to ensure that there is a coordinated approach for the management of these critical community assets, as there is for other forms of community infrastructure, and also helps to ensure that municipal resources directed to tree management are dedicated efficiently and towards a defined vision and objectives. So on to the community engagement program. The UFMP and its engagement program was split up into two phases. The first occurred in February of this past year, and the second phase over the summer, so sort of August into September. The first phase was more to support sort of plan visioning and a high-level strategic approach. And through the second phase of engagement in the summer, members of the community were invited to actively provide comments on the draft themselves, which was the draft itself, which was posted online. Public engagement included a range of in-person and online offerings consisting of, open houses, both online and in person, targeted workshops, both online and in person, community surveys, those are offered online, and tree tours led by Peter Dunker. All considered, we're confident we received feedback in some form for more than 1,000 members of the community. And likely reached or spread awareness of the update process itself, and likely the document to thousands more. So Diamond Head's delivered a great deal of these engagement programs across the country now in support of this sort of strategic plan development. And I think I'd pause and just sort of showcase the range of community segments that HRM's UFMP sought to explicitly collect feedback from through this plan. Each of these featured a tailored engagement approach designed to meet the needs of the community segment being engaged. In many cases, the engagement was led by qualified members of the project team. I had mentioned Alina Bernard and Pipquan Petaquin previous. I'd just say that while diversity, equity, and inclusion are more or less reflected in some capacity in just about all of these plans nowadays, many plans don't go to the lengths HRM has in effort to hear from these communities and individuals in the actual drafting of the plan. HRM has really sort of set the bar with the engagement program that supported the development of this document, and I think that's something probably worth celebrating. So we heard a lot from members of the community. Feedback and perspectives, values have been integrated in various ways. Some explicitly through the action plan, others sort of more passively through the inclusion of graphics or language in the document itself for those that have had an opportunity to review. Include in terms of classifying feedback succinctly, I'd say that's rather difficult, but if I were to try to generalize things, I'd say the community is aware of the development process in HRM and its impacts on canopy. There's certainly an interest in building community and urban forest resilience to the threats faced by climate change and extreme weather. And I just say the folks we reached were often interested in growing canopy and certainly maybe less interested in a continued net loss scenario, which is a pattern I'll get into in just a moment. And I think what I'd note most was sort of the level of support we observed for sort of all different facets of the plan. And so this this sort of poll result is from the first phase of engagement, and what I'd say is, or what I think it communicates, is that urban forestry is a broad priority within Halifax. And often what we'll see in other communities is that these kind of surveys in particular, specific objective areas have a tendency to turn out as a clear priority as compared to others. Just as an example, stay away from trees might be a clear narrative in communities that have sort of seen considerable growth, greenfield growth. Other times it's plant more trees or give me more opportunities to participate. This is not as much true in the HRM, whether it's planting, protection, even operational considerations. These are all seen as valuable to members of the public. And of all of these, I think I'd point to the response we received in terms of sustainable resourcing at the bottom there. One of the biggest shortcomings of the preceding master plan was not, in fact, the plan itself, but the gaps in support that the plan received following its adoption. And if the narrative is to be different this time around, then there would need to be meaningful resources provided to back new and enhanced program areas identified through this plan's strategic framework. Where we did start to see sort of more discrete priorities surface, however, was through phase 2, where again the public was provided the draft at this point. And what we saw was really that amongst the handful of quick start actions, which I'll go over in just a moment, identified through the plan, sort of 2 areas stood out, and that's tree planting and maintenance. I'm going to move on in favor of time. So into the framework now. And what the framework does is really for this sort of function to consolidate all of the background analysis, technical review, engagement outcomes, and perspectives into a concerted direction for the management of the urban forest. The structure of the framework is shown here at a high level, and I'll spend the remainder of the presentation just going over that. So sort of working top down through that framework, we first have the vision, and the vision functions to establish the broad strokes direction for the urban forest. And that vision statement is here. I'll spare everyone me reciting it, but what I would identify is that more than 90% of phase 2 survey respondents, and again, it was at this point that the public had an opportunity to review the vision statement, felt that this vision was at least partially successful in aligning with broad community vision, with a majority thinking that it was entirely successful, so over 60%. The vision is then further distilled into 3 big ideas, and in HRM, those are equity, balance, and community. The big ideas are still fairly high level, and they're difficult to evaluate in terms of successes and failures in and of themselves, but what they do function to do is sort of further refine what it is to achieve that broad vision statement, and they give us an opportunity to sort of further dissect the vision into sort of operable chunks, which I'll refer to as sort of the applied framework from this point on, and I'll get into the applied framework now. So this is the FMP's applied framework. The applied framework implements the vision big ideas, and it's broken out into broad objectives, more specific program strategies, and granular program actions. At its sort of most specific level, the plan contains roughly 100 particular program actions. And as you move from sort of the top down through the applied framework, the objectives and actions, this sort of the specificity of the prescription increases. Objectives and strategies are more bins, otherwise, albeit somewhat specific in their nature, whereas actions are by their very nature discrete and measurable as to whether they've been achieved or not. So what I'm going to do now is sort of move through some context and progress into each of the objective areas. So this will be the context supporting the first objective area, and rinse and repeat for the remaining 4. And we'll start this by just identifying that HRM has relatively high canopy cover municipality-wide as it sort of stacks up against its peers across the country. There's a few reasons for that, and I'm certainly not going to have a discussion on canopy cover in favor of time. But what I would say is that this is no surprise given how much of the municipality is treed. But as you work down through sort of more urbanized spatial summary units, you find less canopy coverage. So a bit of a dichotomous relationship because it's in these urbanized land uses like the regional center that receive the lion's share of attention in terms of urban forestry operations management and resources. And it really just sort of illustrates that in general, greater population densities and intensities of urban use tend to be in direct competition for the sustainment of tree canopy and also demand increased resources for its management. Further, HRM has seen sort of marked canopy change over the last 2 decades. It's lost about 11% or 7,500 hectares from the urban core. While drivers of canopy change are difficult to evaluate with the data sets available at this time, it's safe to say that a good portion of this change has originated from greenfield development. There's a tension here because there's a clear need to support development in communities for all the benefits that it brings with it, housing included. But I'd also say that it'd be disingenuous not to identify other sources of large-scale loss. Just pick on a couple examples: the mid-2000s Mineville Road fire, and of course the forestry industry have also contributed to sort of this broad trend. And I'd say in some of these cases, forests will recolonize disturbed sites. They just have yet to. In the case of greenfield, however, what we're generally talking about is permanent conversion of land and associated tree cover loss. All said, Halifax is a community of trees, and it needs its trees to persist for the benefit of future generations. Few images depict this dependence on tree cover as compellingly as does the urban heat island map, and is shown is a land surface temperature map of Halifax on some particularly hot day in a past year. I think it might have been 2023 July. And I'd just say HRM's urban areas are hotter than its rural. And the principal driver of this exchange is just sort of the relative scarcity of urban trees in urban environments, along with an abundance of pervious surfaces which tend to both absorb heat more readily and it holds it for longer than does canopied area, and to a lesser degree turf grass as well. And we know urban heat is a legitimate human health concern, in particular for elderly populations, marginalized people, and folks with with precarious financial means. And trees are a legitimate tool in sort of combating this exposure. I'd just say, for those not aware, the Chief's Coroner's report after BC's 2021 heat dome explicitly identified a scarcity of trees as a contributing factor to the wave of heat-related deaths that province saw in the wake of that terrible event. So if canopy preservation is a priority within HRM, then some level of decoupling of that historic change between development and tree cover will need to occur in order to sort of transition away from a more transactional nature of growth and canopy exchange. And so this brings us to our first objective, which is planning and protection. Limited room for interpretation. This objective covers the city's long-term development planning and protection processes, as well as many of the actions related to sort of planning for climate adaptation and climate resilience. Most of the actions here are relatively self-evident in their intent, but they include adjustments or amendments to planning processes that may impact matters of tree protection or integration through new development. And a good number also relate to the integration of wildfire management resilience into municipal planning processes. I'll just pause now to sort of flag a few things, or clarify a few things rather. There's two sort of special flags an action in the UFMP might feature. Those are sort of shown at the bottom of the slide. One is priority action, the other is quick start. Only the priority and quick start actions are shown on this slide. All in, I think there's north of 80 actions in the plan. There's just too many for a slide deck, so we've sort of truncated it down to just the priority and quick start actions here. A priority action, for the committee's knowledge, is just an action that is critical to the achievement of the UFMP vision and big ideas. These are particularly critical where implementation is concerned, and they'll often demand newer significant enhancements to existing program resources as a result. Quick start actions are also a priority, but they hold even greater importance in that they represent the municipality's commitment to implement the action in sort of the formative years of the plan's 25-year life. Just generally sort of within the first 5 years of the plan's implementation is when you might expect to see a quick start action actioned. Another sort of important consideration when we think about the urban forest is who has access to it. And ideally, all members of the community share equitable access to the urban forest and to the benefit from the services HRM's trees provide. Unfortunately, not all segments of the population currently share equal access to the urban forest or benefit equitably from the municipal resources directed towards its management. In response, HRM's EFMP has identified 2 new forest management districts, urban forest enhancement districts in the pink and equity-centered management districts in the blue. Urban forest enhancement districts are areas with relatively less tree canopy and generally therefore less trees. And these will be areas where tree protection and planting are prioritized as a result. Equity-centered management districts, on the other hand, don't necessarily have any scarcity of trees, but these are still areas where equity could drive management interventions. As examples, stored in response or the provision of new trails infrastructure, potentially fuels management, and so forth. Objective 2 captures the strategies and actions that not only speak to planting more trees, but equally important to ensuring the conditions and sites we are planting trees into are going to support healthy, vigorous, and full tree life cycles, as well as to ensure planting is serving everyone. Put another way, under the planting objective, we're concerned both with the volume of trees going in as well as what the trees are going into. Most of the actions under this objective are fairly self-evident, so I won't dwell here in favor of time. So HRM is home to an estimated 80,000 planted trees. When I speak planted trees in this case, I'm talking about the municipal asset class that has been intentionally planted and will receive intensive management over its full life cycle. From tree care to removal and replacement, these are assets the urban forestry section spends the vast majority of its operating dollars managing. Good planted tree care is the cornerstone of a sustainable urban forest management program. It builds resilience in the inventory population, is known to elongate tree lives, and reduces the costs associated with extreme wind and weather. Likely a reminder to this audience, but tree-related costs associated with Fiona's cleanup are estimated to have been 1.6 million. As we move into a period where we might expect more of this type of storm, maintenance practices which reduce the likelihood of tree failure under extreme weather present a co-benefit because they can not only reduce the costs associated with cleanup, but they're also known to extend tree life cycles. So these are resources spent on upkeep rather than removal. Now, not suggesting the bill for cleanup following a storm like Fiona can be significantly reduced or eliminated. That's not reasonable, but industry thinking is that proactive maintenance can reduce storm-induced failures, broadly speaking, and offers other beneficial undertakings given that. And again, these are dollars spent on extending useful lives instead of towards removal and replacement. Maintenance, and so this is a big one, but a fairly straightforward one for today's discussion. What we mean when we talk about tree maintenance is tree care, and there's a quick start here for a grid pruning program. HRM has a pre-existing program. It's currently limited by the resources available to it. Achieving a 7-year grid pruning cycle, which is an industry best practice, will require new investment into a pre-existing program. I would also clarify that when tree care does generally speak to planted tree care practices, I do, under this objective, also intend to capture forest management under this umbrella. And I'd just say that HRM holds a significant area of forested land, and in particular forested parkland. While not all parkland is forested, The point would be that there is a lot of woodland to manage, and there's very good justification for a management program centered around woodlands, given this. And I just say that, as with planted trees and really any other municipal asset class, if we as urban residents desire for our woodland areas to continue to provide the same level of services they historically have, whether that be recreational, spiritual, leisure, ecologic, really whatever you personally value, then we must invest in the asset class as we do in all other cases. There's currently limited coordination or coordinated direction in HRM's or in HRM for its woodland areas management program, given sort of the modern spate of challenges woodlands face. Sustained levels of current investment would foreseeably result in the erosion of the quality of those assets over the fullness of time. Perhaps more than any other finding through this process, we've heard from residents how much they care for their trees. While values held in the urban forest are diverse, there's a large segment of HRM's population that is broadly interested in this community resource, and in many cases are educated in its management and would be willing to participate in its care given outlets to do so. Stewardship. And under this category, we have sort of assorted actions related to Indigenous knowledge, integration, community education, research, outreach, and community capacities. HRM's public can offer an important resource in supporting the program, both through their collective voice and through the practical supports for city programs, things like invasives, cleanup events, or planting initiatives, and as well as, and maybe most importantly, through their own practices on private property. And that last point, private property, is an important one because more than 70% of HRM is under private ownership. This is a significant number compared to many of HRM's peers as you sort of move west across the country. HRM itself holds ownership over about 3% or so of the municipality's land base, 10% in the urban core. With so much of HRM under private ownership, the role of private residents in managing the municipality's urban forest is really a critical one. The full range of actions under the stewardship objective are designed to develop and capitalize on the community as HRM's largest landowner, given its outsized influence on HRM's trees. And then I just say that the actions under this group also contain varied actions related to the furthered integration of Indigenous knowledge and values into HRM's urban forest management, as well as supporting cross-cultural dialogues. Now, everything stated to this point comes at a cost, though not a perfect comparison or analysis. In practice, HRM's program resourcing was about $10 per capita as of 2023-24. As I said, not a perfect apples to apples comparison with its peer communities. That sort of analysis is difficult given differing budget structures. But it provides sort of a reasonable measure of how well funded HRM's urban forestry program was compared to a selection of sort of 10 of its similarly sized and similar context peers from across the country. Long short of it is that HRM's program trails the average of its peers by about $2 per capita as of 2023-24. This is much less of a gap than has probably existed over the past decade as program funding has been coming up in years recent. But what I would say is that existing resource levels and funding will not facilitate meaningful implementation of this plan. If the municipality wishes to learn from the experiences under the preceding master plan, meaningful resources and internal champions would need to support the rolling out of the UFMP. Heba Gerard, sitting up here with me and part of Crispin's team, is an excellent first step in achieving this, but there need to be additional resources that would be required in order for staff to champion and implement them. So not suggesting a dramatic increasing in program resourcing need be imminent. This is a 25-year plan, and the actions contained to it are to be phased in gradually. But what would need to occur, and what didn't with the preceding master plan, is a robust monitoring program to ensure that the plan is in fact being gradually implemented, and progress toward full implementation is being maintained on a year-over-year basis. The administration and monitoring objective area contains actions to resolve sort of this concern, and they cover program resourcing, asset management, governance, and a whole range of sort of affiliated actions. Several actions identify explicit new capacities as our formalized processes to support resourcing levels and accountability in the monitoring approach. And that last one, the monitoring approach, is an important one. This is not an internal document borne by one champion or municipal section. We've invoked a multidisciplinary approach to HRM's urban forest management, and it will require the coordination of multiple internal champions and departments in order to have it fully realized. And there are actions in the UFMP to this end to support this. There's a working group, quick start action, and a financial plan. That's another quick start action. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. We are past our time. Are we okay to move forward, colleagues? Do you need a break, or are you okay to carry on? Do we need a motion to do so? We just acknowledge with thumbs up. We're okay to keep going? All right, thank you. That was the official legal thumbs up, ma'am. Okay, thank you. Tyler, thanks very much for the presentation. Truly appreciate it. I know there's a lot in there, and you probably could have gotten much more, and I appreciate that very much. Let's see. Let's go to the floor for questions. Councillor Cuttle. Oh, sorry. Well, could you put the motion first?
Yeah, I see there's a motion. I'm not on the committee,
Oh,
so
right.
maybe somebody from the committee
Councillor
wants to
Steele,
go first.
who's next? Councillor Gammon, could you put the motion on the floor? How appropriate. Councillor Daigle Gammon's going to put the motion on the floor. That's just...
I was waiting for
Things
that.
are lining up. Stars are lining up, folks. That's
I was waiting for that, Deputy Mayor. So
I mean that with great respect. You know that.
the motion is that the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council 1 revoke the Urban Forest Master Plan 2013 and support the principles contained in the new Urban Forest Management Plan as set out in Attachment 1 of the staff report dated February 28, 2025, and 2, direct the Chief Administrative Officer to carry out the actions contained in the Urban Forest Management Plan as part of the multi-year budgeting and business process.
So Councillor Hartling's seconded. So Councillor Gammon, why don't you carry on, then we'll go to Councillor Cuttle. That's okay, Councillor Cuttle?
Thank you, Councillor Cuttle. Thank you for the presentation, much appreciated. And to set the story straight, I do love trees. Just so you know, I understand the value, everything like that. One of the things that I was interested in, and I think this new plan, of course, is very good. I'm wondering, I just recently, it was yesterday, my days are running together, sat in on a Federation of Canadian Municipalities Environment and Issues Plan, a committee meeting, and they talked a lot, or one of the sections was on their, the Canadian Canopies program. So have we, and I actually went and found a couple that were funded and wanted to read a little bit more about that. Have we accessed funding through that? Are we going to? Will it be part of the master plan?
So, Chair, through you to the councillor, yes, we actually have an application in. We have some, they've followed up with some questions. We have some other information, but we have an application in for roughly $1 million over 2 fiscals.
Right.
So that would fund at least 50% of the planned growth identified in the planning program in the updated UFMP.
Could save us $1 million, couldn't
Yes.
it? So, yeah, it was very interesting, and it just seemed very timely to be in that committee meeting yesterday and to read all this stuff, and at the same time be looking at this report. So kudos, because I wondered, because I asked them, I said, can you tell me who got approved already? And they said, oh, no. We can tell you how many got approved, and we can tell you the ones that are in process. And so somebody gave a wink and a nod, so I was pretty sure that we were in there somewhere. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cuddle, Dorothy, should you give her her 2 minutes back that she lost in that? Thanks. Councillor, the floor is yours.
So generous with me today there, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So this is a very in-depth presentation, well thought out, well laid out, a lot to consider in there. Some of the things that come to mind for me are about, when it comes to urban forestry, an urban forestry program and planting trees in the urban core, which this is primarily directed at, is about the space for planting the trees. And when you look at the heat island maps, it's obvious where we're having the heat island effect. Yet I have deep concerns that our planning policies are not aligning with our forestry management policies in providing enough right-of-way space to plant trees. And so I know I say this all the time, and I'll say it again. In Toronto, they have a 3-meter wide standard right-of-way regardless of where the property boundary is, from the curb to the front of a building, to allow for bioswales and room for trees to be planted. They also put priority on getting sunlight down to the streets, to allow for the growth and health of trees. So, they're taking a very integrated approach in their urban design and planning policies to support more sustainable cities, particularly looking at mitigating the impacts of the heat island effect. So if you have any comments in here about how you're working with planning, in that kind of nuts and bolts way about, how do you make this a success? Like how, not just planting the trees, but ensuring the conditions are there to support the long-term health of the canopy. That's question one. The other question was about the per capita calculation, right? We are an anomaly. There is no other regional municipality of our type in the country, and that is a challenge when doing, trying to do comparisons. But I think it is fair to do a comparison of what's within the urban service boundary and what's outside of that. We make that line in terms of transit service, in terms of water and sewer services, taxation, snow operations. So there is a definitive line there, and I'm wondering if we recalculate that, given the program's an urban forestry program, and we kind of recalculate that based on the urban service boundary and the population within the area that's really getting the benefit of this program, where does that put us on that scale of comparing us to other areas? Because it's not comparable when you take the entire municipality, because it's just there's too much difference between what's within the urban service boundary and what's outside of it. Because right now it looks like we're not spending enough, but I just want to, if there's a way to get more of an apple-to-apple comparison there, so that we have a kind of a realistic assessment there. And then my final comment was about the woodland assessments and management. That is relevant to areas both within the urban service boundary, but outside of it. I can talk about the Shaw Wilderness Park, for example. I get a lot of comments from residents that hasn't been cleaned up after Juan. There's a lot of deadfall. I've seen the federal government and York Redoubt doing the Fire Smart program there, really making a big difference in cleaning up the forest on their property. I don't know what they're doing on their other properties, but that one I'm familiar with. And then there's also the provincial part, that we have so much provincial crown land. And so when it comes, I agree that a woodland assessment and management plan is needed, just given, the dangers of fire, of, needing to promote healthy forests. So much of our forest is kind of scrub little trees. I take the western Wilderness the Western Common Wilderness Common, as an example that could, as an area that could also really use some forestry management and assessment to ensure that that forest is healthy. I mean, those are my 3 comments. Thank you.
Chair, through you to the councillor. So yeah, I guess on the first comment question, I can say we do have an action in there that speaks to continuously updating the municipal design guidelines. What I can say is in 2021, is it, when we updated the guidelines the last time, we did get a whole tree chapter in there. So that was actually a real win for trees. So we made trees at that point, okay, we're aware these are an asset in our road right-of-way and we need to consider them along with all other utilities. And we have some criteria in there which speak to boulevard widths and soil volumes. So we're moving in the right direction. Do we need to do more? We recognize we do. So that's why we have that identified as an action item to continue to monitor that and continue through each iteration of the municipal design guidelines to always be applying the best management practices. To your second comment, I'm not sure, Tyler, do you have anything to provide there with reference to, comparing inside the service boundary to outside? I think is a challenge because the types of forests and the needs of the residents are so different. So clearly the majority of the investment we make in terms of maintenance and planting is within the service boundary. Outside the service boundary, it's very limited. So from an equity perspective, maybe we need to address that, certainly, and that we've recognized that through the update to the plan, that this urban forest management plan, unlike its predecessor, is focused regionally, not just on the urban core. So we wanted to leave that opportunity open for considerations of, we have municipal parks outside of the urban service boundary. Are there opportunities for, canopy or planting or working with community groups in those areas? And I think the goal of this update is to start looking at that to see how can we ensure a little more equitable investment across the municipality as a region. In terms of comparing the two, I think it would be very difficult to do just because they are so different in terms of investment, other than just making the argument that maybe we do need to consider a more equitable investment across both sort of categories of urban forest.
Or a more equitable calculation. Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hartling.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really enlightening. I actually want to follow up on, I think, what Councillor Cuddle was talking about too, in terms of the boundaries that you set forward. I was quite shocked to see the boundaries that are outlined here by, if I'm reading the map correctly, the new boundary for this plan would be as far out as like Bootleers Point, which is very, very far away from what I would consider urban. So I think, as I understand it, the role that you would like to play that far out there is just in terms of managing fire risks. Is that really what it comes down to? I'm trying to fully understand the role that this plan would play that far outside of the urban service boundary, because that's quite far out. And then to follow up, because I do have a particular interest in that. I guess it's kind of like a 2-part question. One is that if you could speak any further to what your plans are in terms of WUI, wildland urban interface firefighting, and how you imagine your role and what you would play in that. I'd be very interested to hear that. How you plan on addressing, tree lots that are owned by the municipality. Inside of communities. There are many communities in certainly in District 13, I expect that they're everywhere, where there are lots owned by the municipality and they are simply just wooded and completely unmanaged. So is it your expectation that you will play some role there? And then my last question is actually around planting trees. Can you help me understand where and when you plant? Like I said, I'd be awfully surprised if you had any interest in planting trees in Bootleers Point, right? So if I could get some feedback there, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Councillor, Chair, through you to the councillor. So roll outside. the urban forest, we're typically considering urban, but we recognize that we have communities that are in the rural area, and those communities have needs. We get requests for volunteer tree planting events. We get requests for, say, planting on parkland or work with HRCE and the school board out in those areas. So while, the typical kind of urban forestry operation the municipality has, which is, confined within the service boundary, our cyclical pruning program, our vegetation maintenance program, and our tree planting program are sort of confined within that area. What can we do? So I think we've got some ideas of what we can do, but ultimately we have to hash that out. So that's the plan is essentially said, we're now open to this. We're open to looking at, partnerships with First Nations, partnerships with some of these rural communities to see what it is that we might be able to support through, leveraging grant funds or anything unique, really. So no, we wouldn't be looking at tree planting out in those areas in the road right of way, because that road right of way would be provincially the provincial responsibility. But we do have HRM parklands in those rural areas. And in terms of some of those, you mentioned the tree-owned lots, that we know that's a gap currently. And we've identified that through a number of action items in this plan, that the municipality has urban parkland and some of these, what are termed open space areas that are arguably, from a wildfire perspective, could be considered a liability, but are also a missed opportunity in terms of, are there recreational opportunities that can support marginalized communities that may be in the vicinity, to give them access to the urban forest, and all the benefits that provides. But I'm not sure if that answers all your questions. I guess the last point would be the WUI. So yes, that's already been identified by Halifax Fire. I see Peter leaning back here. So Peter Dunker is the co-chair of the Halifax HRM's Wildfire Advisory Committee. I'm not sure, Peter, if you want to say anything to that. But in terms of our role, we've identified an action item that speaks to natural areas management, which could include fuels management, depending on if a wildfire assessment has determined that, HRM parkland might be, and based on the fuels type in that area, might warrant it. So work has to occur. We need to first, identify the WUIs, do the fuel mapping, and identify the wildfire risk. That work's currently ongoing. Once we do that, it's identifying the resources that may even be, targeted teams to go out and do fuels management, so we ensure that our parkland is not contributing to a risk to a local community. But I don't know if Peter has anything he wants to say.
Yeah, if I could just add, thank you very much for the opportunity. You will note, or you may remember in the presentation under planning and protection, 3 of those priority actions deal with wildland urban interface as well. They should. The second thing I might point out, and councillors may know this, that Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency hired a wildland fire coordinator.
We all know her.
Staff position. Kara McCurdy. Right. Kara and I together chair the Wildfire Advisory Committee. And on this panel are 3 members of that committee, me and Heba and Crispin. So we're in contact with a lot of other people who are also concerned about the wildland urban interface. And compared to a year or 2 ago, it's getting a huge amount of attention, and well, it should, given the calamity back in June of 2023.
And so my last follow-up question is, can you tell me where, through what metrics, where and how you decide where to plant? And incidentally, I'm also secretly wondering, and if you can speak to it, that would be great, just the amount of tree damage that we have had because of hurricanes in, the last couple, we've had quite a few significant hurricanes in the last decade or so. If you could speak to, does your plan address recovery efforts, what we do? But yeah, where do you choose to plant, and how do you make that selection? Thanks.
Yes, Chair, through the councillor, how do we choose to plant? we prioritize based on, firstly, we replant. So, and that's just based on the time the tree was removed. If it was removed came down in a hurricane, natural mortality, we will identify that site for a replanting. When it comes to new plantings, so, we have 2 programs, an operating program, which covers roughly 1,000 trees, and that's based on a rolling 3-year average how many trees we lose in the municipality, storms included. So we plant those go back out into the locations where we lost those trees, usually within 2 to 3 years of us losing those trees, because we have to remove the tree, remove the stump, and then go back and replant. When it comes to new trees, that's basically what we've done is we look at all districts to ensure sort of an equitable approach to planting trees. We identify streetscapes that haven't been planted that can receive a tree. We take a look at the conditions. Are they suitable? And then we assign that within a planting plan for that year, and usually try to distribute the planting across the municipality within the service boundary and within an urban streetscape typology. So we wouldn't plant a rural streetscape. So essentially you've either got a curb or you've got a curb and a sidewalk that we can plant the tree in between. So we identify those locations for planting. We go out, we plant those locations, but as a consequence of planting, sometimes we may encounter reasons why we wouldn't, underground utilities, so that sort of could dictate whether we actually choose that location to plant. But our sort of prioritization model for new trees is essentially, dividing out the urban core, dividing the number of trees we have across that urban core, and then identifying streets within that, oftentimes dictated by if we have, say, community interest. We tend to prioritize locations of planting where we know people want the trees. So if we've heard from residents, from community groups, whether they want the trees, we'll go in, we'll plant a tree, and then we might choose to plant that entire street if the street can accept the tree, and we'll identify that for that season, and we'll go in and replant that. So there's kind of a number of factors. I don't know if I've answered that question well enough, but that's it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Steele.
And thank you for the detailed presentation. I have a couple of comments and then maybe a few questions. I'm really pleased to see that you're looking at other levels of government for funding this. I know federally and provincially there are currently programs there. I think around council we all really agree trees are really important for our health, for our physical and mental health. So I think this is a key priority, and I think there's a lot of support around council. We're just worried about funds. I noticed a lot of emphasis on planting trees, and I wondered actually if the strategy should be called the tree planting strategy, because it seems like that's where the funding is going and that's where all the emphasis is going. And part of the reason that I raised this is the district that I'm in recently, HRM, the previous council, not everyone was here, but decided to sell a piece of parkland to the province for a school, which is going to mean many, I said thousands and thousands, probably it's maybe not that many trees will be cut down in the area. And I found it kind of ironic as I'm running down parkland one day, I see trees being planted, and yet not very many meters away, I know there's a scheduled cut down of so many trees. So I wonder, I'm hoping this framework or strategy will prevent that kind of decision from coming to council in the future. I know that many of the residents in my district are very angry about this decision. Their property values will decrease. Their health will probably decrease because of all these trees being cut. So just moving on from that, those two statements, I'm wondering if you had a lot of consultation with other levels of government on this plan and how that's reflected in the strategy. And then finally, an even bigger question, how is the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes wilderness area, how does that fit into this overall strategy? So I know it's late in the day and those are big questions, but thank you.
Chair, through to the councillor. So the first question help me out. I've forgotten the first question. The Birch Cove, and the first one was
Other levels of government. How are you actively seeking that constantly and consistently so that we can continue to have the trees we want in the city, but at the same time not being on the hook to fund everything?
Right. Well, I mean, in terms of the engagement through the development of this plan, we had representation from, provincial DNR, quite a significant representation, as well as the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Canadian Forest Service, just to get an idea. And they gave lots of input. We've worked closely with them, since my arrival in HRM 6 years ago, through invasive species monitoring programs, trialing new products for invasive species control, working with the province definitely strongly through invasive species monitoring to understand, what pests are on our doorstep and what products are out there and available. And of course, through our Hemlock Woolly Adelgid management plan, there's been work with the province and the federal government there as well to understand, what synergies there can be between the province. In terms of funding, we're always looking for opportunities. Recently, I'm sure many people are aware of the 2 Billion Tree Program. That was announced with great fanfare. Unfortunately, the 2 Billion Tree Program, because it's aiming at 2 billion trees, it's looking for a low cost per stem. And unfortunately, in a municipal government or a municipal environment, it's expensive to plant trees. So we found that at each iteration of the 2 Billion Tree Program, we just weren't within sort of scope of what they were expecting. The cost of planting trees in a municipality is just too high. Fortunately, the Growing Canada's Green Canopies, which I must give kudos. Heba did all the legwork on the application for that, which is moving along swimmingly. It was not a small application. That's the first time we've had an application through the 2 Billion Tree funding that fit our needs. So we're always open. We also have partnerships with Tree Canada, longstanding, to apply for grants, and we've applied and received grants. We actually received a grant just this year for $50,000 through the CN Eco Connections grant, which is a program of Tree Canada funded by CN. So in terms of planting, we're always looking for those opportunities. We've found one. Up until now, there really haven't been large scale for our needs anyway. But it's not to say that we aren't always out there, got our nose to the ground to see, what's available, what do our partners have available to us. And in the case of this program, they came looking to us because they knew, we had already had communication, open lines of communication with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They knew we were looking. So by maintaining that networking, we're always there, open, available, and ready. If there are grants available to apply for, we'll apply for them. In terms of the Birch Cove, we have a number of action items that speak to things like natural areas monitoring, fuels management, both operational capacity, but a monitoring capacity, and also like setting up sort of a framework of, if we're monitoring what it is we're looking for. Because we know, we've got a lot of natural areas out there, some of them which just through, say, recreational use or natural succession, blowdowns, storms, have degradation that could use an intervention to ensure that they provide the value. We recognize that as a gap currently, and this plan hopes to fill that gap.
And what about protecting?
Councillor, I'll get you to come back. Sorry.
Okay.
Councillor Dale Gammon.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Chair. Pretend I'm David Hensby. He's texting. So how can the urban forest management plan be applied in rural areas? And what he's thinking about is like the Sheet Harbor streetscape and municipal parks where there's very little shade protection.
Chair, through to the councillor, Councillor Hensby. So I think, as I sort of previously mentioned, there are definitely opportunities for partnering, leveraging grants. So as Councillor Hensby may know, we did do some planting out in Sheet Harbor through a Tree Canada grant in the past. Right. So there are these opportunities. What we've looked at through the update, we have, as I mentioned, the capital planting program, which is for growth. Historically, that was solely in the streetscape, solely within the urban area. We've now expanded that to include parkland. which was a gap previously, which would give us the capacity to consider HRM parks outside the service boundary. Now, we would have to be, clear on that there will be added costs. It's farther distance away, and there's issues with maintenance that we have to consider. But that does open up that opportunity to consider planting in some of that parkland out in the rural areas, certainly.
Thank you.
That's how I start all my therapy sessions, to pretend I'm David Hensby, but that's another story for another time. Councillor Steele, you have the floor again.
Okay. I'll say pretend I'm David Hensby as well. That's great. David's a strong advocate for his district. Just following up on my question, I don't believe I received an answer. Just in terms of emphasis, a lot of emphasis on planting, and of course that's important. But what about protecting existing trees? And the situation, the one example I gave you, but I'm sure we see it all across the municipality, is there was existing parkland that had been part of a development agreement that was there for that community, and that's been, through decision of council, taken away. So will this plan protect residents in the future, protect parkland, that treed parkland, let's be really clear, treed parkland that's used by wildlife, that protects the environment for the residents? Will this plan help protect that?
Chair, through to the councillor, I think that the plan will protect that insofar as this plan promotes the protection of all trees and promotes, public awareness of the value of those trees. Specific projects I can't really speak to because every project has trade-offs. One I could think of is the QE2 infirmary redevelopment. Some trees need to be removed for that development, but the value of that development largely exceeds the removal of the trees by a long shot. And we did what we could and worked with the province to try to protect what we could. But there are some trees, there's always trade-off, there's always collateral. So I think this plan, in terms of protecting trees on parkland from, say, an expropriation of this sort, would be just, ensuring that the community is aware of the value so that the community will be vocal enough to protect and voice their desire to protect that treat area themselves and sway the will of council, so be it. But in terms of, we do have some action items that speak to considerations of protection of trees on parkland, on private property. We do have an existing bylaw which allows us to, if it's trees on parkland, we do have an ability to at least recover offsets to use for planting elsewhere. We do have a bylaw that allows us to do that for private land as well. But in terms of, speaking to that specific example, I can't really. It would be, an argument of trade-offs at that point. And I don't think we would have any specific policy in mind to prohibit a development at the expense of trees, just for that reason, because we know the development could be a net greater benefit than the loss of the trees.
Go ahead. You have another question, Greg? You don't, but I cut you off before, so go ahead.
So in the case of the Radcliffe Drive development, where the trees will be cut, so there will be some, or there could be some trade-offs then for the members of the community that are going to be disadvantaged by that, and they're going to be, have pavement in their backyard rather than trees?
Councillor, Chair, through you to the councillor, unfortunately for this development, I don't have the specifics on that. But to say that we do utilize our bylaw both internally and externally for projects for that reason, to identify, say, if we've got a capital construction project, for instance, that's removing trees on a streetscape, we will identify the value of those trees and then utilize that value to consider replanting either within that project or in the adjacent community. And we've applied the same to parkland as well in the past. I just don't have the specifics for that project.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you, colleagues. Seeing no other names on the board, I'm going to shorten up my questions if that's okay, because I know it's getting late. Crispin, thank you very much for the work that you do and the passion from your entire team. It's amazing. Colleagues, when Crispin was first hired here 6 years ago, there was a long list of people that wanted to come, and Crispin was very qualified. However, being his last name Wood, we had to hire him for sure. I know he's heard that before, but I had to throw it out. Peter, good to see you again. Peter, I look forward to another tour of looking at our street trees in District 6 this summer. Hopefully we'll do that again, right? Okay, well, I will call you, sir. I do want to acknowledge one of your team members, Kevin Osmond. Kevin has been a great resource. He's passionate about the urban forestry plan and the trees. And every time we reach out, whether it's an issue or just a community event, he's there. So I just wanted a good shout out to Kevin. Very quickly, I'm sure that you were paying attention at budget time. You heard the conversation about cutting back on the tree planting. Good to hear you're going after funding the Growing Canadian Green Canopy funding program. You would have heard, if you're listening to budget, a number of councillors making reference, and their residents referring to it also, the trees we plant that end up not surviving. Could you just talk about that a little bit, because that's a frustration. I hear the same thing, even as passionate as I am about our urban forest, that why are we planting trees like that? Why? I know it's changed from when you came, but still we're still getting that response, and many of us in this room are getting that response.
Chair, through to you yourself. Through you to yourself. Yes, this is a tricky one. The planting program. So under the original Urban Forest Master Plan, there was a goal of planting 26,000 trees within 10 years. That was an extremely ambitious project for a municipality of this size. Just to give you an example, prior to this, I was the manager in the city of Edmonton, and we planted about the same number of trees in a city 2-3 times the size. So this was ambitious, and with it came learning curves and continuous improvement. When we first started the program, we were identifying existing locations where we needed to plant trees where trees didn't previously exist, and some of those locations were, on paper suitable. They proved not to be suitable. We had, through the previous Urban Forest Master Plan and Peter Dunker's assistance, we had a research and monitoring program utilizing students who were monitoring our planting to identify where our problems were when we're planting trees and they're not surviving, so that we don't make the same mistakes. Is it new species we need to plant? Is it site amendments? Is it just these are just not good locations to plant trees? And I think just through this push for a very ambitious tree planting program, we had some lessons learned. So we saw some trees fail, and we've learned from that, so we're not identifying those locations or those species to plant anymore. We've also made amendments to our tenders. We've improved our warranty program. We heard from the public through previous engagement opportunities and this past UFMP engagement that they're hearing the same thing, or they're seeing that we are planting trees and then walking away from them. So we updated our tenders to ensure that we had 2-year watering programs in the tenders. We increased staffing to ensure that we were monitoring our contractors more effectively and ensuring that they were holding their warranties, following up on warranty inspections and sort of other requirements. We were requiring the contractors to go out and either fertilize or remulch trees at the 2-year mark, all to try to improve the establishment. One of the problems with planting trees is establishment is difficult. You're always going to expect a degree of mortality, but once you get the tree established, you can usually maintain that tree on the landscape and grow it to maturity. But essentially it's just lessons learned over the past 10 years. I think we've come a long way. Our mortality has declined significantly through evidence of our research and monitoring program that Peter Dunker led. But there's still work to do. We're still learning. And unfortunately, the recent odd, erratic weather as a consequence of climate change is putting pressures that are sometimes just curveballs that we don't even see, where we end up losing certain species after 5-6 years of being in the ground, just because we had an odd weather event that resulted in this species not performing very well on the road right away. So it's a myriad of issues. Needless to say, we're aware of them. We're aware of our past failures. We're constantly looking to improve.
Yeah, thank you for that, Crispin. Establishment is difficult. Some would say the same about councillors too, but that's another story. Just to finish off, Tyler, from your presentation, things that jumped out at me. Halifax is the tree city of the world. Even though we've lost 11% of our canopy, and the last comment I saw from there is, we need trees to persist with our trees for the future of our generations. I think that's critical. Seeing no other names, we'll ask for the call for the question. Question and call for all those in favor of the motion that's on the floor signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? That motion is carried. Crispin, thank you, sir. I really appreciate the work that you and your team do. And just so to finish up very quickly here, there are no motions, and there's no in camera, there's no added items. Are there any notices of motion? Oh, thank you. The date of the next meeting is April the 3rd, 2025. I need someone to move an adjournment. So moved by Councillor Steele. Then the meeting is adjourned at 4:08. Thank you, everyone.